Welcome, everyone, to our panel discussion, Lead Like a Man. My name is Gazelle. I'm a recruiting, diversity, and inclusion partner at Idealo. And today's panel discussion is in honor of tomorrow's International Women's Day 2022. And we're going to talk about leadership and what leadership has to do with gender and if it has anything to do with gender. Now, don't worry, we have all been tested, and this is all happening according to COVID regulations. And also, please remember that you can also be part of this discussion as well. We're happy to receive your questions in the chat. You can write them down right now or later on. And then we're happy to answer a couple of them after our major discussion. And then first up, I'd like to introduce our panelists. And I'm starting with you, Aga. Aga, you have been with Idealo since 2015, started as head of performance marketing manager, and now you're chief marketing officer. And you speak in favor of diverse teams, diverse perspectives, and diverse ideas. Thank you for being here.
Exactly. Thank you, Gazelle.
Then we have Kati Huke, welcome. You joined Idealo 2019 as Chief Commercial Officer, and you're responsible for growing Idealo's supply side, so basically the merchants or B2B partner side, if you will. And I understand that you appreciate that you're working in a very diverse organization when it comes also to professions, for instance, because it's a very diverse department, if you will. Welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And then we have Megan at Idealo. Megan is responsible for product management, engineering, and analytics as the domain lead of marketing technology. And when you were working at The Gap, you were basically launching your leadership career in a quite female-dominated environment. And this is inspiring a confident and empathetic leadership approach. So thank you for being here as well, Megan. And then we have Richlyn. Hi, Richlyn. You have been passionate about empowering members of your team and the teams themselves. You're also leading international teams in product and technology at Idealo. And you have also various experience in leading volunteering teams at Color Sisterhood. You fought against injustices like human trafficking, but also for girls to have an opportunity for education. So thank you so much for being here as well.
Thank you.
Now, to start off, I'd like to recite a study that has recently been published by the Hans-Böckler Stiftung, which is quite a popular German labor union foundation. And according to that, women in leadership are still relatively rare. We only have 11% of women in the 160 largest German companies. So that means 89% men. I think this figure is also impressive. It's just important to drop because it's a very high number. However, when we look at the second level management, we have 40% of women at least. And now looking at you, Megan, I understand that you were working at The Gap with lots of female representation. Do you think representation is still important? And if yes, why? I mean, 40%, that's a lot, right?
Yeah. Of course it's important. I think it's important to keep talking about it, partly because of absolute value numbers, but partly because women, there's still subtle, under the covers, ways in which women's leadership styles can be received differently than men's. So, for example, if I'm strongly directive, if a man is strongly directive, that can read as strong or a mature leader, and in a woman it can read as mean or bitchy. So I think beyond the statistics, there's still more social reasons why we should be talking about representation.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Katharina, I understand that in the sector of B2B and account management, there's a tendency that it's rather male-dominated. What is your idea on representation?
Yeah, good question. So in general, I would agree there's a lot of men traditionally in sales. I think it has changed over the past years, especially because also sales has become a different role, especially in tech and platform organizations. However, also in sales and account management, most of the leaders are male, so there's no exception there. And maybe even in sales, there tends to be also a bit more alpha male than in other functions. That might be the case. And there again, I think teams then are, and that's maybe also something that's not just particular for sales, but also for other functions, that also teams are used to having a male leader. And this is also the expectation towards, okay, I want my boss to tell me where we're heading, what is the direction. I want clarity. I want to know what to do, and that this we also need to take the teams on board of a maybe more, if you will, female leadership style, even though I think that actually it's very hard to distinguish leadership styles according to gender. But yeah, of course, sales and account management, I think, it's just a very similar topic there. And maybe in some parts, especially if you look more to traditional sales organizations, even more so.
I mean, it's interesting that you will mention it that way because you were talking about maybe people are used to like seeing those, let's say, male leadership styles. I'm already now like moving around this very cautiously because this is a very crucial topic for this discussion. I mean, we named it Lead Like a Man. This is certainly a title to frown on. And maybe starting with Richlyn, what was your reaction when you first read the title? I mean, do you think that there's anything like male and female leadership?
Yeah, I mean, even when I advertised it to my friends, I had questions already about, so is this a workshop? Is this an informational thing? What exactly are you going to talk about here? And even for me, I mean, actually on my journey, I struggled with this thought of if I'm even feminine enough, right? And then to come into this leadership position, it was even a struggle to say, do I lead like a man? Am I leading like a woman should in leadership? And that brought a lot of questions, I would say, for myself. But as you already kind of alluded to, is leadership really alluded to gender? Is it based off of that? And what are the norms that come along with that? Especially coming from the PT side, a technical side, where a lot of developers maybe aren't female, and again, used to having male leaders and wanting it to be a certain structure. It's interesting when you bring in other constructs or other perspectives that maybe a woman would bring in based off experience. So lots of thoughts, basically, to answer your question. Lots of thoughts came in, seeing this name and this title, mostly feeling a little bit like, kind of rubbed me the wrong way. What is that about? Yeah.
And did you feel that you have found representation throughout your career so that you can see like, okay, this is me and this is not me in a way?
That's a great question. Yeah, I guess I would say in different individuals, in different people's walks and different leaders or examples, you can kind of identify with that relates to me. So whenever we take these personality tests or Gallup strengths, when I would find out other people with like-mindedness, it made it easier for me to accept that like I'm a female and maybe most of my personality traits would be, let's say, more strategic or analytical, which might sound uncommon for females to have those attributes, and kind of just get to the point of it. That's just authentically me, so that's okay. It doesn't matter in which construct or what's the norm, but if these are just my traits and I own them and I walk in them and I'm authentic with myself in my leadership, I think this is going to be the best thing that I can do for my team and for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. So finding the best of whoever you're meeting on whatever strengths you find out about. Now, Aga, when you read the title "Lead Like a Man," what did you feel? What did you think?
I hate it. Really, because I don't want us, to talk about it. I think it's exactly the way how you can be the best leader and what you need to it. And to be honest, there are so many studies providing that, saying with every 10% of diversity, gender diversity, you have more performance, you increase the revenue of the whole company. So I think it's already straight. Is there like it's obvious, that we need this different perspective. But the question is why this is not happening, and why maybe some of the women, I don't think all, and I think all of us sitting here has also a different experience. It's okay, why maybe they don't try to be a leader, or why in the past they just didn't, choose for themselves another way.
Yeah. I mean, when I hear you say that, so idealo has committed to a number, basically. So we're currently at 37% of women in leadership positions throughout all levels, all qualifications, which is above industry standard for tech companies, which is above German average, basically, when you look at women in leadership positions. And we want to move up to 44%. And I was wondering, how do we find the talent, though? How do we find good leadership? Maybe not even gender specific, but how do you look at leadership and how do you know this is a good leader?
I think we have to be aware that, the people are not leaving the companies. but they are living the bad leaders. And I think that's the way, like, that we have to hire not based on the past track, but on the potential. And to be sure in the recruiting process that, you just don't go very stereotypically in some kind of the questions that you get the answer that you want. But you just look behind it and you try to find these people. I think that's important. Another thing, like many times we're thinking about, you said it at the beginning, that 40% of the women are already like in a leadership position, but the highest one is like just 10% or something around it. And I think that's the problem, because once the women build up their career, there are like around 30, maybe 35, and this is for many of them the time to found, to get children and have some time for the family. And this could be really a big blocker into the career. So I think that's also something that companies has to think about it. Okay, how we make sure that this very normal process for the most of the people, like having children, founding a family, cannot be a blocker to having a career. So I think that's something, finding this kind of balance or making it possible to be a leader. I'm a CMO and I just came back like not a year ago from my maternity leave, and I'm not working full time. Where this is possible, and having this kind of example to showing this is possible, and you can really do your job, and you can still be, dedicated in your job, but you can also have some time for your family life. So at the end, you feel wealth and your mental health is good. I think that's the way to go.
So basically providing a sort of a setup that is according to a life of a woman in the leadership position, or like in the workplace. However, that also has different shapes, I believe. I mean, Megan, how would you promote good leadership? I mean, how do you see, oh, this is a good leader, I promote you?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to say, I think one track to bringing more women into leadership is external candidates, and certainly we were all external candidates at one point. And another track is sponsorship of the existing talent you have. And I think here we're really privileged to have a lot of amazing talent at all levels that is female. And I think one of the biggest things you can do as a leader is be a role model and also be a sponsor. So identifying those people you have that are strong, that are adding value and can grow up, create accountability for them, create roles where they can be successful, create opportunities for them to grow. So I think there's two parts: being a role model that shows women internally, hey, I could grow my career here, but also actively sponsoring and pulling them up, which sometimes I think is very important, especially at a junior to mid-level, to have a good internal sponsor.
Yeah, to even add to that, I think that would be my story here, actually, where initially when I was applying to idealo, I was applying as a junior developer. And in my interview process, the recruiting manager, Christian Beck, who's a domain lead, and some of the others who are part of the interview process, recognized that actually your background might be really suited for a team lead position. Would you be interested? And I had to check with them, are you sure you see and understand, my background? Did I give a false impression? And even for that, to be able to see, they took the extra step to see really the whole picture and say, you would make a great team lead. And I think that even goes back to answer a little bit of your question too, is we have to define what kind of leaders do we want in the first place? What does that look like? What kind of skill set should they bring to the table? And I think that also helps dictate. So for him, he could recognize maybe in the non-traditional that I'm not the senior developer who's leading the team, but he could see other skill sets that mattered and say, yeah, you would be great in this position. So yeah, just to add to that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, Kati, I know that you have been a leader for a while now. If you were to set an example, like what kind of a leader would you wish to be and be perceived as? Like, what are your values that you want to convey?
Very good question. There's so many things that come to my mind when you ask about, okay, what leader do I want to be? I mean, it's a big question. I could probably talk for an hour, but. So what is important to me, maybe just the most important points, lead by example. So really, I think actions always count more than words, and what you do has an impact. People will always look at you, orientate their own behavior according to what you do. And I, as a leader, set the standard for everything. For example, what kind of meetings do I hold? Do I waste people's time, or do they go out of the meeting and say, hey, this was useful, and maybe take one or two ideas on how they can improve their own meetings? And So always start with yourself and wonder what you can do better to become a better leader and also be in the topics. And so that's, I think, super important. Another point that comes to my mind is ask questions and listen first before telling. I think has been especially true for my story because I've become a leader or in a management position quite early on in my career, because also what you just said, I had a boss who saw the potential in me, who gave me the trust that, hey, Kati, this position is free. I know it's a pretty big role for you, but try it. You have 3 months, and if not, then we just call it interim position. If it doesn't work out, no problem. We can still hire someone permanently. And if it works out, even better, and you also know whether you will like it or not. And so for me, it was always important to rely on my team, understand their perspective, and trust their expertise. And this was, for me, the way to go. So really, I felt super responsible on how we collaborate, that we have efficient structures, that we come together, that we discuss, have a good also environment and culture of trust and discussion. But then mostly the actual input needed to come from the teams. And then I also relied, of course, on people taking that responsibility and saying, yes, I want to provide my ideas. And so really listening to the team, also making sure the more quiet voices are heard. I think that's also important, talking about finding women in the workspace, because they might not be the loudest, but they talk when they have something to say. And leading by example, listen first, I think are one of my two most important leadership principles, if you will.
I mean, that reminds me again of what you said, Aga. I mean, when I read through the Hans-Böckler Stiftung study, I saw that out of the couples, so heterosexual men and women couples with children under 18, 68% of those couples, there was the woman working part-time and the man working full-time, right? So a relatively common pattern. And then we heard about, trust, but also is a meeting important? And then all this information, like if I was to ask you with maybe very specific ideas, what do we need to do in order to make this work, for working moms to have a part-time leadership positions? Do you have any very specific advice that you could give?
Big question.
Sorry, Anna.
Yeah, just very specific advice. I think make the job doable, because sometimes we pack so much thing into this leadership position, and the leader has to be in many, most like a team lead has to be very strong in the expertise part, but also very strong in leading the people. And you have to cut it in the way that is still doable, that the people feel that they can fill the role, and still grow within it. And I think, but also make it more flexible, it's something that is so obvious for us, but flexible working hours, working part-time. But I think also what, for example, helped me a lot was coming back from the maternity leave, not at once, but just, going but with more and more hours, which helped me to adjust to the new situation and to understand, okay, what kind of the challenges I'm taking on myself, which maybe still have to be part in the team. So having more understanding for that we let that the job is important as part of our life, but when we are happy in our private life, we are also more effective in the job.
Absolutely.
And that's so true for both women and men, right? I mean, it's not just women who need more flexibility and want time for the family, but it's the man as well. And I think only if we look at both, we can also actually solve the bigger problem, because it can't be the women alone who take care of the care work and everything, but it's a responsibility of both.
And I mean, that brings me also to the aspect that, I mean, when we talk about diversity, this is a big buzzword. And then again, it has many layers, many dimensions. We will not be able to cover all of them here. But I mean, how, for instance, Megan, when you're looking at your responsibility is also quite grand, right? It's a big domain, or at least also where it's positioned in the organization is absolutely crucial. Do you strive for diverse organization, and how do you do it? And do you just how do you do it?
Yeah, how do you do it? So there's a few parts. There's obviously a hiring challenge. There's assessing the current landscape. I have to say that I think my core principle is that a diversity of thought on a team is really important, especially a technical team or a cross-functional team that has a hard problem to solve and they're bringing multiple disciplines together. Diversity of thought is what makes better quality solutions there. That might not cut down gender lines. That can be socioeconomic, that can be class, that can be the country that you're from. But having different representation of thought styles and personal experiences on a team is a big success factor. Obviously, there's also a need for representation of more women, especially in roles like technical developer roles, team lead roles, et cetera. So, of course, we think about that, right? We think about, do we have a completely heterogeneous team here, and how is that limiting that team's growth potentially? I don't have so much of that at the moment. I think one thing that's lovely about idealo is it is actually a genuinely very inclusive culture, and there is a lot of diversity of thought, and people bringing different experiences to the table. But of course, I have had to make some readjustments in hiring profiles. If we receive only CVs from kind of one profile, then maybe we want to go out and look specifically for someone with a little bit more of a diverse experience. And of course, we have our eyes, as leaders in the company, we have our eyes on salary ranges and benchmarking by gender, by level, et cetera, et cetera. So we have some mechanisms and some internal indicators that we can use to say, oh, do we have a big imbalance here? Like, do we have our eyes on balance or imbalance? I don't think it works to get too much more granular than that, because the other thing about leading a cross-functional team or a high-performing team is you also can't really manicure it too closely. It has to grow organically in some way, right? And that is also interesting because it doesn't happen quickly. So every time you integrate someone new into a role where they're going to have a big impact, they need months to really see the ripple effect of that impact. And so I think where that shows up in the hiring or the sponsoring of great women leaders or future women leaders is you have to set them up for success early in the tenure of the role or in joining the organization via onboarding, network connections, et cetera. That's a big part of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that reminds me of your story also, Richlyn. I was thinking, you were bringing kind of technical experience. You weren't just, you knew what you were up for and like in the bigger picture. But then again, as you said, that the person who hired you saw you on a different like scale, if you will. How did you find your way into it? I mean, if you were to like motivate a person who's also like, I thought I was junior and now I'm a team lead. How did you find your way into that? What did you tell yourself? Did you read books or were you just following your heart?
I mean, it was an interesting thing because I knew that I would be, meeting in the interview process. I met the team and everything, and I realized quite quickly, okay, I'd be the only woman on this team. I would be the youngest on this team, and I would have the least technical experience compared to my colleagues. Yeah, it was kind of that thought of, am I really up for this? Am I setting myself up to fail here? I mean, what's going on? And just kind of said, I'll just give it a go. Kind of say, well, there's always, a COVID site, and we just see how it is. And I quickly found that having the basis of caring for people is a really great starting point. But recognizing that, hey, my background is not in vain. It's not wasted. I can do this. I can believe in myself. I can bring something to the table. And it's not just that this is a diversity card to bring a woman in to just say they've done that, check mark, but it was really, okay, diversity is having a seat at the table, and inclusion is knowing that my voice is also heard. So I felt like I was given a lot of trust really early on to say, yeah, we really want you as a leader, and we really want to support you however we can, and vice versa. And then being at idealo now a little over 2 years, recognizing that I've had a lot of great opportunities to continue to further that leadership journey. So definitely a lot of books, lots of resources for sure. So I'm always looking for things to help me better myself as a leader. But I have to say that just that initial trust was a game changer. Just to know that somebody else saw something in me and was willing to give me a go, give me a shot, and then believe that for myself. It kind of was the beginning of it all, so to speak.
I want to build on one thing that you said, which is knowing that you actually do bring a number of qualifications that might not be perfectly mapped to the requirements of the role. And in the hiring experience and also in the promotion experience for especially junior to mid women, you see a lot of self-limitation where people go, I don't have all the qualifications, whereas I mean, you get 100 resumes from any random male, and I think women they self-limit in terms of like, I need to meet all the qualifications, or I'm not 10 inches above the level already, and therefore I'm not eligible to grow. And I think that's really important to keep an eye on, is where women might be self-limiting.
Yeah, because both advertisements were posted on the page, but I chose the junior role, right?
Yeah.
So that in itself was already a moment, and that was an aha kind of thing to realize, like, I was self-sabotaging, so to speak, or getting in the way of my own success. And I think that would be maybe one advice, I suppose, for anyone else listening, that, recognize like you do bring something to the table, and that we bring something valuable to the table, and that we can kind of go for it and have that boldness and courage, as you all have already here.
And one thing to add is like being a leader doesn't mean that you know already everything. It's like still, a journey that you go and you further learn, you grow, you make mistakes and you learn out of them. And I think being honest, and also being honest like with your team and with the people, being empathical and having all the skills, like that's okay, And I think having this kind of motivation, to be better every day and to make everyone your team as well. Yeah. I think that's also a big potential and a good starting point.
Absolutely. That was the biggest part of my journey too, was just recognizing that being authentic was more important than being perfect. And being okay to be transparent about maybe the mistakes or the vulnerabilities of, I'm actually not so sure about that part. And recognizing that, okay, leadership now is so much more about empowering and enabling, that it's not like I have to know it all and I need to make every single decision on how, when, and what, but sort of creating a discussion, creating the right format for the team to be able to collectively find a solution together, and to know that me as a leader, that's how I serve my team, not by being necessarily the expert, but by creating room for all the voices to be heard.
Santa's saying that, the most said word, like sentence from myself, is like, how I can support you. That's what I'm asking my team. So it's not like, hey, do this and this, but like, okay, how can I help you that we, achieve this goal together?
Now, what I'm wondering though, Kati, when I think of account management and sales, and please correct me if this is like cliche talking, but I think of KPIs, and you have like, 5 calls every day. That's probably very low. Let's say 50 calls every day.
Minimum.
So exactly. And now we talk about freedom, empowering, asking questions, and everybody gets their voices heard. How does that go together? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. So I think for sure it is important to have a direction where we want to go to. I think that's also true for all other functions, right? You need to have a certain clarity on around, okay, what's our mission, what are our goals, and then this also creates the freedom, right? Because once you know, okay, what is important, then you can also think about how do I get there. But if the what is unclear, I think then also then you need to ask for every little bit in the how. And in sales and account management, we have very clear targets. That is super important because it's measurable what needs to be done, what needs to be achieved. But then again, also here in the how, there's a lot of freedom, there's a lot of flexibility. Also, I have head of account management, team leads in my team that, of course, also play a great role in then formulating that strategy on how we go about it, what are the processes needed. But still also every sales and account manager has their own right to think of, okay, how do I approach that client? And also even reacting in the call itself, because in the end, we're talking to people and you need to understand very quickly in the call, okay, who am I talking to? And then adjust accordingly. And this wouldn't work to determine that top down. So I think sales is not so different from the other functions.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you work in an agile environment, and again, I'm looking especially at Megan and Richlyn, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's all about power to the teams, that they work quite autonomously, and they have the experts in the teams that they need to make their own decisions, right? Has this ever come to a limit for any of you that you say, oh, that was too much trust, or that was too much freedom? I need to take them on a shorter leash? Any big struggles in your leadership careers, perhaps?
I think that if you're working in an agile environment and you feel like you need to have a leash or some guardrails, you're not doing agile right. So that's how I would say to that. But I do think what I'd like to focus on is around accountability and creating accountability, because working agile does not mean that you work in the absence of accountability, right? Like as a community of leaders, we define goals because we believe we're taking the company in the right direction. And what leadership actually, there's a great, John Maeda is a really amazing thinker kind of in our space. He was the head of the MIT Design Lab for a while, and he said something at a conference that really stuck with me, which was like, leadership is the pressure that you feel on your chest because you are the fulcrum between the status quo and the future that you're trying to create. And that's why it's hard, and that's why it requires resilience and a tolerance for complexity, and being willing to do the work and being willing to have accountability. And if you feel that accountability as a leader, but not everyone in the company is feeling that accountability, then that's a collective exercise that we need to do, right? To be better about like, hey, this is the direction we're going in, and this is why we're all motivated in this direction. And that's what management science is like, how do you motivate a big group of people on common goals, right? So I think it's less about like how good you are at agile and more like, do you feel accountable, and do other people feel accountable, and do they know how to deliver good results and how to be successful? And I think we veered off now into a very genderless territory. Like that's just collective kind of management science. But I do think that you see very strong leadership, not to single out Richlyn, but you see really strong leadership in a team-specific leadership context where it's about creating context, creating motivation, and kind of keeping people eyes on the prize. I think I have seen women in those leadership roles be very effective at creating that context and creating an environment for the team to kind of do the design thinking process if that's how you're trying to work,
Any other pitfalls, Aga, if you look at your leadership experience or your journey, anything that you learned the hard way?
There are always, hard situation. That's okay. You have to accept it, in a situation when you fail or you don't make the right decision. And I think that's completely okay. But at the end, exactly what Megan said, I think this is this feeling that, you are, and what also Kati said, like, you are this kind of example. You want to be there to show other people, to follow you. And you have to manage this. So I think that's a challenging, and I think you have to be a person who is open for feedback. Mm-hmm. And it's also like, reflecting what I did in the past. I think that's also very important. So looking forward, but also being aware, what's happened. And I think, in this new context, if we look on the remote work and having it even more difficult to be a leader, like we working like in a diverse environment, and we have remote work coming. So I think having even more this more feminine characteristics, can help even more, to bring people together in these more challenging times. Mm-hmm. So I think, the future.
I thought you were going to say the future is female, although I always say the future is not binary.
It's diverse, I wouldn't say it's female. That's what I don't like it. I think it's important just to have this different, backgrounds and opinions and, diversity.
The future is diverse, that for sure. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, I know that you, Richlyn, maybe all of you are, sorry, but I researched it on you, that you know of a network for women in tech. So could you recommend everybody to just join a network and then have your role models there?
Yeah, I mean, I basically last year, I was I was a speaker at a Women in Tech conference. And this was an additional thing that came with the conference was this very big network of women. And even off the bat, as a speaker, I already had opportunity to write people. I say, okay, you spoke last year. How did you do it practically? And then could also feel the emotional support too. Like, you're going to do great and all the great feeling stuff. I suggest that's not the only network. I mean, even within Idealo, we're trying to build up as well another leadership network as well to sort of grow together, because at the end of the day, we're all people, right? We all have our limitations, we all have our backgrounds, we all have our experiences, and we're just trying to do the best we can. And that's what importance of a network is, sort of recognizing that you can share those things with others and get that support with others, and vice versa, offer your support as well. And so it's all in the name of trying to make this a better place. So
finding your role models anywhere. And then coming to what we were saying in the beginning, take what you need from it and then for your style. And we do not want to say it's the future is female, the future of leadership is female, but there is some things that we should learn if we listen properly, basically. Before I continue, I just want to encourage the audience again to send the questions because we are happy to answer them. Don't be shy. And I might need somebody to support me with the Slido questions then again, or to tell me the questions. We kind of had a breakdown with the iPad. But we can always wonder. So what I was always also wondering was, so Megan, you're coming from the US background of at the Gap, we already talked about. It was all like female representation, many female leaders.
A lot of female leadership.
And then also it's like the US, and then it's a couple of years back. How did that change? I mean, do you feel that the leadership style has been very different from what it is now?
Moving from the US to Europe or to Germany?
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say I've been more surprised by differences in the structure of like companies or how companies are run or structures of decision making or structures of accountability than I have by particularly gendered interactions or representation. I think tech in the US is not a particularly great place to be a woman by and large, which is why we see worldwide all of the support networks for women in tech. At the same time, and I was also very privileged, and this was also a choice, but I was privileged to kind of grow a tech career within the context of a company with a lot of female leadership, which is true across, I think, fashion and beauty sectors. You would see that, right? But I guess I haven't seen major cultural differences. I've actually been really pleasantly surprised by the number of smart technical women in kind of mid-senior roles that I've come in contact with in Berlin, and I think that one amazing thing about working in Berlin is how diverse it is in terms of people from all over the world. So really observing like people with a very different career arc, education path, et cetera, from myself, all working together. And that creates kind of this beautiful diversity of thought. On the flip side, I will say that I was not just interviewing with idealo at the time that I was interviewing, but one of the big reasons I picked idealo is it was the only place in Berlin where I interviewed with more than 2 women in the management team. So not just like the women who, they weren't token positions, they were really like women on the C-level. And that was such a big motivator for me, that was a very clear signal of the particularly inclusive environment that this is. But I, of course, can't speak for all of Europe.
Actually, I would. That was a loud laugh, but I'm going to say, first of all, thank you very much for who helped me with the iPad. So we're back on the questions, and this is very much corresponding to what you just said, because one of the questions actually, but everybody else, please be invited to answer them later on. There's no specification to Megan, but since you were saying that you were positively impressed by the process at idealo, have you ever had an actual case where you felt discriminated because of your gender, or where you felt that it was weird, or anything directed in the direction?
Yes. And I want to be a little bit careful about, I'm not going to like give specifics on a situation or names or whatever. But it can be a very lonely experience being in the directors and above population in like tech companies with a very like majority male leadership or kind of strong, maybe a little bit of a toxic masculinity vibe. It's the women in tech support groups are there for a reason, and that is real. Yeah.
Get that. Anyone else experience similar things?
I have it once, I was invited to, it was not in the work context, but it was like on some kind of conference, like was a dinner, whatever, for like C-level decision-making people. And I came in, there were like 99% white men above 60 years old or 55, let's say. And when I came there and I stand to some group, get my drink and started talking, they're all thinking I'm like, assistant or someone, having the drinks. And then first we started to talk, okay, what you're doing, what is your job? It was like, okay. So that's so funny, still. It's like...
I have exactly
but
the same. Exactly the same.
It's not, in the startup industry and in the Berlin industry, but if you go more this old-fashioned ways, it's like, sometimes it's
I have
funny.
exactly the same, but not even with 60 plus, man, but really just 35 plus or 40 plus. So not even older, or maybe 2 years or so, but still, okay. I thought you were like part of the people team also here. Oh, yeah. I mean, not that I would also be happy to work for people, no worries. But it's really this. And they also say it out loud, and I'm like, no. What can you say to this? Yeah.
I've had that in recruiting. When I'm talking to engineers to recruit, I had once specifically, I had an engineer on my team with me in the interview, and the candidate said to him, "Oh, it's so nice to finally have some techie guy with us in the interview, because normally it's just like people or like HR or whatever." And I kind of got the feeling, you think I'm HR, and I had to clarify, no, would be your manager. And it was sort of this moment, but it's happened more than once that the person confused me for, being part of the people rather than being the hiring manager. So we literally put it now on the advertisement, like my face, and I'm the hiring manager, so they know already. But that was definitely a case. And a second one was, I was meeting someone for coffee in Idealo, and they never met me, and then they were surprised that I was a woman, and they said, "Oh, I thought because team leads are normally men, so I didn't know that you'd be a woman, actually." So that's a nice surprise. And I thought, cool, okay.
I mean, it speaks actually for itself. I mean, I work in recruiting, right? And we started to actually also mention the hiring managers, especially if they're female leaders, to encourage people to actually apply and to not be surprised that we're actually trying to stand for what we're preaching here and what we're trying to achieve. Now, the next question is around the topic of imposter syndrome, which, like in a very rough definition, is that you are successful, but you still think you're not, basically. And the question is, in general, women suffer from imposter syndrome more than men. I would like to know your tips for dealing with it day to day. Any advice?
It's a good question.
I think it's important to have like a mentor or someone. It doesn't have to be like, professional way a mentor, but a person that you feel very comfortable with, that you still trust this person, and someone that you have these feelings you can still learn from. Because if you get a positive feedback from this person, I think this can help you really to adjust. Okay, that's just your thinking, or this is something that the people from outside also perceived. And I also think like feedback from your team and your direct reports, because at the end, if you are getting the feedback that you're doing a good job, then you can.
And building on that, I think. So I also would say I often tend to kind of more look, okay, what is still missing? Yeah, what can I do better? What are the problems I still face? And and not so much on, okay, this actually worked well, and this was a success. And once I get good feedback, I also want, or I can only give that advice, do appreciate it and really enjoy it and take it seriously, the good as well as the bad, but also the good, because I think it's human nature. I don't know the factor, but I think every negative is perceived 5 times as strongly or so than positive ones. So and that's also for men, same as for women. Yeah, you need to balance that out. So make sure you really take the positive feedback and your successes, your achievements seriously, and celebrate them.
I mean, there is a question that's kind of related, I believe. Do you have any advice for introverted people as well? I mean, we talk about, getting feedback, but maybe this is a person who needs to be asked, do you want feedback, right? Like, do you have any advice for introverted leaders or introverted people?
I think that's, when the company should also gain in, so at the end, setting this framework that at the end, everyone, doesn't matter how extroverted and introverted you are, you have the possibility to get 360-degree in best way feedback. So I think that's also a responsibility on the top management, to make it possible for all people to get feedback.
Find allies, find colleagues that you have a good relationship with. I think you don't need to be friends with everyone or need to have the biggest network in the company, but if you have in the same meeting that you're always in, one person that you really like and that's kind of your peer, that's great already, and then you can build on that.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me back to the question about networking, why it's also important, because it is a huge support group that could be formed there where you have people going through the same things, maybe other introverted leaders, and you find how are they doing things? What challenges are they facing? How are they overcoming them? And also to go back as well, where I was saying the authenticity, that you being authentic to yourself is going to serve your team well. So even if you're introverted, that doesn't mean that you'll be a bad leader because you're not the loudest or something, or whatever those thoughts or limitations might feel like, but rather recognize, okay, take an assessment of what do you bring to the table? What is good for the team, and recognize that those strengths, you can lean into them and grow and mature them, and then that will benefit, because we don't need to be everything in all things, but rather ourselves, and always improving what that looks like. I think that would help someone who's introverted to kind of recognize, I can be introverted, I can be myself, and I can come to my team and know that I'm being a good leader. Believing that for themselves.
That makes sense. And any books on that regard, or in general? Like, somebody's asking for books because we were talking about books.
I think there's one book actually that I haven't read it though. I think it's called Quiet. Also, it's exactly on the strength of introverted leaders, because, as you said, they also bring a lot to the table, and might be great to have an introverted person as a leader. So I think it's called Quiet. Yeah, but I cannot recommend it myself. I'm sorry.
But that's a hint. Any other books? What are your favorite books, Aga?
I'm thinking, if I have one, I read a lot, but then I pick, just 1 or 2 sentences out of it, and that's what serves. I really like the book Multiplier, because I was like, being a leader means being a great multiplier and having everyone else grow. So the idea, a lot in the books is sometimes, blah, 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 and repeating, but if you get to the point. Another one I really like, the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. Like, it's also helped me to somehow make it more visible for me, what are the things that can help me being a better leader. That's things that just pop now to my mind, have to think.
Those are good choices.
Anything to add, Megan?
Oh, I don't know if I have great manuals in the more kind of interpersonal engagement space. I end up recommending a lot of books to people very specifically in kind of product management or management science, partly because I think those things are really universal regardless of gender. But yeah, I guess I don't have good book recos.
There is one, it's also quite obvious, but it's like the Lean In from Sharon Sandberg. It's like, I think it's a good thing to start, because it makes you aware of many things, of the bias and all these gender differences. So I think that's a good starting point to think about this. Yeah.
And one other book that comes to mind is 5 Levels of Leadership by John Maxwell. I really enjoyed this book because it challenges leadership to not be limited to only a title, but rather the relationship that goes beyond that. And it kind of goes into the different levels of leadership and how to form those relationships. And that's one that comes to mind. Otherwise, I have too many books coming to my mind right now that I can't focus on one, but that's one that I can say. Yeah.
I would say From Good to Great. It's a management book. It's a classic, I think, a few years old or even decades. And the author looked at data from, I think, 50 years and all kinds of corporations in America, and wanted to understand why do some companies outperform others, and then really understand what are the factors. And it always came down to good leadership and then he examined what is good leadership. And actually it's exactly what we were just talking about, quietness and listening and being humble and serving your team, making sure they can work, appreciating their time. And I think that was so revealing, because it's in some ways counterintuitive to what you always think great leaders should be. I really enjoyed that book. Yeah.
Nice. So that's quite the reading list. what I absolutely want to tackle as well, what I read here in the questions, you basically introduced in the very beginning the idea that people do not leave company, they leave bad managers. And now there's several voices here saying that they're not very happy with their managers who are men. Or it's a very male-dominated environment. And they're basically asking, do I just leave? Or what do I do? Do I fight? And if yes, how?
Good point. Leave and come to us, we have a lot of open position. No. I think, it's difficult, because at the end is the question, it depends on the company, if it really has some kind of the hub or the points that you can go, it's like the people team that, you can approach if you have a problem, or someone else, if you are able to have really an honest conversation with your leader, and to say what is not working well. I think that's quite a tricky situation, That's not an easy answer, unfortunately.
Yeah. I had a strong kind of manager mentor early in my career. I was very fortunate, a man actually, not a woman, who gave me some good advice, which is it's very rare to have a manager and a mentor in the same person. So if you have a relationship with your manager that is not a natural mentor, right? Somebody who maybe doesn't get you or inspire you or see, your intrinsic worth and want to expand your capabilities, find that in another human and then make your relationship with your manager transactional or a manager relationship. Know that you push that person for clear goals, clear accountability, clear success targets, but maybe don't try to get personal validation from that person if that's not organically there. And there are people in your organization or outside of your organization in a variety of different spaces where you can get some of the other things that we've been talking about around validation of your skills and strengths and talents and positive feedback and other people's experiences, et cetera. So that may not just come in the same person. Not to excuse bad management. We all know what it looks like. It's terrible. We've all left them, but really just to say, like, it's possible to also make lemonade and maybe not a realistic expectation that your manager is also going to be an amazing mentor and career grower of you. Which reminds me of a book, actually, this is random, but I just thought of my book recommendation, which is Strengths Finder. I think a big part of people finding satisfaction in their role, knowing how to move up, knowing how to kind of create the right relationships in a work context, are about knowing their own strengths and value. And it's shocking to me how many people don't know their own strengths. And so the things that they maybe want to be working on or delivering value on are not mapped directly to their strengths. And they might have amazing strengths that aren't being leveraged in their actual role. So another reason that there might be friction with a manager sometimes is that actually your own self-perception of strengths and value delivery may not be super clear. And that might be something that you want to work on or continue to move towards that clarity.
Yeah, and just to piggyback a little bit on that too, when in regards to mentorship, right? Because of course, sometimes we might feel limited, like who is in our circle that can mentor me? Maybe they don't have access. So I would even encourage that some people can be mentors from afar. So I know for me, early in my career where I didn't have a lot of mentors that I could reach out to and really gain some advices from or something. So resources like books and podcasts and stuff, these were my mentors, or people like Christine Kane is someone that I looked up to a lot because a lot of her story was so aligned with mine, and she had a lot of childhood trauma and abuse, and that was my story. And finding her strength to be able to start this organization that goes against human trafficking is something that I could align with her. I could see her story. I could learn from her journey. I could somehow gain strength from her strength. And for me, that was so necessary and so good for my journey. So I didn't have access to people, but I had access to books and podcasts, and that was pretty good for those few years. So,
yeah. That made me think of one other piece of advice, which is because mentors from afar, cultivate a personal board of directors. So a board of directors of a company is not necessarily people who work at the company or are affiliated with it or even in the same industry. It's people who can provide a diverse perspective. So have your own board of directors that brings a diversity of thought to your actual talents, your strengths, your accomplishments, et cetera. And that can be people you're related to. It can be friends who are able to be objective. You know, it can be people you meet at conferences, et cetera.
So maybe like as a wrap-up question, for everybody, 1 or 2 sentences. And I try to not make it too broad, but I kind of want to, so let's just do it, and then you just say whatever you want. So leadership, should it be male or female, Megan?
That's not the right parameters of the question.
Perfect.
Yeah.
What is good leadership then in that context?
I think good leadership is about creating accountability, creating a clear story about where we're going, and providing people with the tools that they need to be successful, which is ungendered in my mind. The manifestations of that sometimes have connotations of being more masculine or more feminine, but I think as long as you keep your eyes on core principles, the gender is not really a label on that applies, I think. Yeah.
Aga, what do you think?
I can just agree, with what Megan just said, because that's exactly the point. It's not about having gender or gender split. It's about having exactly the talents that you need and the skills, so that at the end, as a whole organization, we grow. Because you can have, the best talents, but if they don't fit together, and this is not like a team, and they are not comprehensive to each other, you would also not grow. So I think the puzzles have to fit.
That makes sense. Kathy?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So I think, also in the previous discussions right around the title, we were like, okay, what is make leadership? I think everyone thinks something or has something different in their heads, and in the end, every person is an individual, and also I think leadership styles are just as individual as the personality of every leader. So what is great leadership? I think we talked about, what can I add to what I said previously? I'm still a bit hung up in how can we actually promote more women into leadership roles. And I think maybe one thing that is, and we talked about that at some point, it is important, I think, nowadays for leaders to make sure that people from all kinds of backgrounds have the possibility to grow as leaders. And I think one tool for that is really addressing those unconscious biases that we all as humans have in our heads towards so many different things. And also, of course, they help us. Yeah, biases help us make very fast judgments, but they also really lead us to the wrong decisions. Mm-hmm. And I think one job that leaders should take on nowadays is making those unconscious biases open, spoken about, and thereby addressing them. And I think this way we can really make sure that we help those leaders with the most potential, be it male or female or any other gender, to grow up.
That makes sense.
Yeah, like all of you, I agree. I mean, male and female leadership is as relevant to me as extroverted or introverted leadership. I think it has its own strengths. It has its a rather diverse skills brought to the table, and it's more about the individual person's story and background and what they bring rather than if they're male or female. And as you put it well said, that it's all about us who are in the leadership positions now to kind of unveil what biases do we have, like what are our beliefs on leadership, and how do we make sure that that's not the narrative passed on to the next coming generation of leaders. And great leadership, I think, is just, as we spoke about, someone who's self-aware of that, right? In general, self-aware and willing to take on the role and position to lead the team, lead an area, lead a group of people to a goal, and to know how to encourage and how to support those people that are under this leadership to be able to move forward successfully. So, yeah.
Perfect. Then maybe to wrap it up, I believe we heard a lot of words like around the word of like puzzles, for instance, bringing things together. And so we also had this one question actually that was asking, what is non-binary leadership then? Like what is maybe trans non-binary leadership? And obviously this doesn't really exist either. What we can do is just pick the best parts that we find and then find our own leadership style, find people that support us and concentrate and focus on that, focus on positive feedback. and then go our own way. And with those words, I would like to thank you so much for taking the time for these amazing conversations that we just had. Thank you everyone for watching on the Brückentag if you're in Berlin, or on a regular Monday if you're somewhere else in Germany. It was a pleasure. Thank you all, and have a good night.
Gazelle.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Gazelle. Thank you, everyone.